Let me just make sure everything's working first. Yep. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, you guys can hear me. I can see the audio now. Okay, so chapter 11 is human resource management. And human resource management pertains to how employees can manage, how employers can manage their employees, and they can do so in a manner that is legal, meaning that they're not infringing any rights, things of that sort, and uh, how to achieve the employer's goal in a way where they're not causing any problems. So, human resource management is defined as the process of determining human resource needs, and then recruiting, selecting, developing, motivating. So, recruiting is finding people, selecting is selecting who you want from those whom you recruit. Developing is training them, building them. Motivating them is encouraging them to do the job. Evaluating is reviewing their performance. Compensating them is to pay them. And they say scheduling employees to achieve organizational goals. So scheduling is, I mean, you know what scheduling is, right? Setting up their routines, their operational organization or organizational activities. So human resource role has grown because of obviously the increased recognition of employees, but more importantly, laws. That's why HR exists because of laws. In my last class, I said if students, if employers could lock you to chain you to a desk and not feed you or you know abuse your rights, if they can get away with it, they would. All right. I mean, slavery exists to this day illegally in certain parts of the world. You know, laws prevent people from being their nasty, wicked nature of themselves. So the laws are in place, the laws are protected, and human resource management is there to manage the resources of humans, human resource management, such that they're not breaking any laws, but also more importantly, that you're able to get around, not get around the laws, but sort of manage the laws so that you can get what your company, your objectives are. And sometimes it goes both ways. The employee takes advantage of it. This is everything we just spoke about: training, developing, selecting, compensating. It's just visualized. So the challenge of HR is big. You've got global politics, technology, laws, uh, different generational gaps, baby boomers, millennials, um, so on and so forth. Uh, it makes a more challenging environment. But the important thing is sort of what sort of led to or encompassed human resource management. So one of the things is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits the discrimination in hiring, firing, compensating, apprenticing, training, terms, conditions, privileges of employment is based on race, religion, creed, sex, national origin, age, sexual orientation, and more recently in terms of mainstream understanding, gender identity. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is to prevent an employer from discriminating in these 8 categories. So religion, for example, if you have a certain religion, I can't discriminate against you because you're that religion. But religion can definitely discriminate in terms of uh, their practices, right? Maybe a clergy can only be a man. Maybe you can't do something or something has to be done a specific way because of religious practices. So I don't want to say it's a catch 22, but what if you're running a religious organization, right? Uh, does the Civil Rights Act of 1964 apply? So there are certain religions where you couldn't hold certain authorities because of your ethnicity. Excuse me, your race. So you know when you're dealing with religious organizations, it's different, right? So if you're working for an HR company as a religious organization, is that HR company absolved from the Civil Rights Act of 1964 if it pertains to religious duties versus the organizational structure of a religious entity that's not related to religion in the structure of the entity. So, obviously I'm not bringing up new concepts here, right? So, uh, the idea, if you have a cultural center, you know, can you discriminate in hiring at a cultural center because of the cultural center is tied to a race, religion? So, sometimes it's I don't want to say gray. There's laws about what you can do, what you can't do, but there's obviously been a lot of bickering, and it's been challenges in that way. But in the general sense of the matter, like for example, uh, you work for a bank, a law firm, Target, Walmart, something like that. They can't discriminate against you because of these things, right? Uh, but perhaps if well, it depends. So these things were put into place to protect and prevent discrimination. And human resource management is there to sort of interpret the law in the legal way and really to prevent the company, the employer, from getting into trouble, is what it is. It's less about you, the employee, it's more about the employer protecting itself, following these laws and rules and making sure it's not discriminating and so on and so forth. Likewise, 1972 Equal Employment Opportunity Act is also another area, affirmative action, guidelines for workplace, acceptable employer conduct, so on and so forth. Remember the law as it pertains to your exam, the definition. But as an HR company, you have these laws that came into place. Is the company hiring and managing their employees according to the laws that's come up since 1964, 1972, 1991, Civil Rights Act of 1991, especially for federal contract and compliance programs, 1990, Disabilities Act of 1990. What if you're disabled or autistic? It says it requires employers to give applicants with physical or mental disabilities the same consideration for employment as people without disabilities. So I use the example, what if you're a construction worker and you're in a wheelchair, right? Can you do the job? Can you discriminate against someone? So obviously I'm not bringing up new concepts. These things have been discussed before they passed the laws, after they passed the laws. What if you have a disability that prevents you from doing a physical labor or a physical activity that's required for the job, and you can't do that. You can't do that job because of your disability. Am I discriminating against you? Right? And then the other thing is here, it says 2011 saw regulations that widen the range of disabilities covered by the ADA and shift burden of proof of disability from employees to employers. So the employer has to prove it, although the employee is the one that has the disability. So it's good, but then it's challenging as the employer to interpret the situation, meet your needs. And also, a lot of people pretend to be disabled. Some people, not that they're applying for a job as a disabled, but in reference to you being disabled on the job, people complain disability, fraud, things of that sort, which is a side topic I'm discussing right now. And the issue being is that, employers are trying to protect themselves, protect the risk management of discrimination, lawsuits, but then also employees can take advantage of situations, laws that are put in place to protect people. They can, take advantage of the laws. So it's tough, right? But I think it's a good thing if it's done right and fairly, and if there's just some logic and common sense about it. And yes, there has to be reasonable accommodations as well for employees. You know, if you're in a wheelchair, you could do an office job, right? What's the big deal? Shouldn't people discriminate? So, and then there's the Age Discrimination Employment Act, where ageism, it still happens today. People discriminate because you're old. So employers can't legally ask your age, right? So some people, they're older, they dye their hair when they go on job interview. They don't want to look old, right? I had a client, she lost her job during COVID. They let her go. Manager, uh, she's an older person, and we was joking about ageism, right? You know, if this happened 10 years later for her, how would that impact her ability to find a job, right? I think in some cases the ageism does have an impact, in other cases it doesn't. You know, there's a reason why people discriminate against people over a certain age. Work performance, benefits, things of that sort. It has an impact. You know, you might think, oh, someone's older, wiser, more experienced. Depends on the job. Depends on the job. So, but people are not supposed to be able to discriminate against your age. People still discriminate. Okay, you can't prove if you apply for a job and you don't get hired. How do you know they did or didn't discriminate against you? Now, if you go to a job interview and the person says you're too old for this job, then they discriminate against you, right? You have proof. But if they just say thank you for your time, Mr. Johnson, and you don't get hired, then you don't have proof, right? So a lot of these rules and regulations are for people to follow the guidelines, but everyone tippy toes around it sometimes. And human resources, the department wants to achieve the goals of the company. That's their first priority. But they also don't want to break laws. So their practices are oftentimes going to be derived or created in a way that fits the organization's needs and doesn't break any laws, but they could still be, in fact, discriminating against people you wouldn't know it, right? They hire one person with a disability in their office that's like super visually disabled, right? And then, hey, we got our token disabled guy, and okay, hire what they want to hire because it is what it is. So, uh, for your class purposes, you just need to memorize these laws and things pertaining to it. Not all companies hold themselves to a higher standard. They do not. Okay. Job analysis, a study of what is done by employees who hold various titles. So when you're looking to hire someone and you're trying to be prudent about not discriminating, doing the right thing, you're doing a job analysis, which is looking at the description and specifications of the job. So what's really important is, do you meet these requirements? Here's the job. I'm analyzing what the job is. These are the descriptions of the job. Here's the specifications of the requirements. This is what should really be relevant, right? But then as a person, your personality, your characteristics play a big role of how you work. You can't always put that on a document. You could say you're a team player, but how do you know, right? So the interview oftentimes boils down to a person talking to you, and it's their judgment call to decide if they do or don't like you, if they want to hire you. And a lot of times hiring is internal or it's external through alternate sources who you know sometimes. So it could be challenging, especially the algorithms looking at resumes and things of that sort. The recruitment process can be very challenging because realistically you could just do the job, but you're not getting the job. So it can be challenging, especially when you're dealing with people. So recruitment, a set of activities used to obtain a sufficient number of the right people at the right time, right? So what's important is the internal sources of recruitment and the external sources. Internal sources is looking for people within your company, promotions, employees, transfers, departments. External sources could be anywhere, right? It could come from any outside source. And then this whole supposed human resource process, selection, hiring, orientation, so on and so forth. Um, but just to reiterate, when you graduate from college, who you know or how you position yourself is more important. If you belong to a club or a group in school that's allied with a job prospect, like if you're studying accounting, and let's say you're African American descent, and you're part of the National Association of Black Accountants, NABA, your job prospects as an accountant are much, 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 much higher at one of the major accounting firms if you belong to NABA. And if you go through their process, you'll get a job. Okay. If you don't belong to NABA, you're going to have a much harder time finding a job. So, belonging to the right type of leadership programs, associations, and programs on campus, you got to find them, you got to hunt them down, look for them. Sometimes they're not advertised with your college, but they have a chapter. So you might have to find an organization and see if that organization has a chapter at your school, get associated with them, and they help you get a job in your field, whatever your field is. So keep that into consideration in terms of this whole selection process. Selection process is not about who's the most qualified. Selection process is just a selection. It's who's selected based upon where they find you and how they want to get you. All right. So that's real talk. Now, hiring contingent workers. Workers do not have the expectation of regular full-time employment. So this is part-time workers, temporary workers, so on and so forth. There's 15 million contingent workers in the US, most under 25, gig economy. A lot of self-employed people, they do gigs. They take contract jobs here and there, work on demand, seasonal jobs, Christmas time, things of that sort. So looking at the 3 steps of training and development, assessing an organization's needs, what they need, design the training program, and then evaluating if it's effective. Depends on, you spend 2 to 4 years in college, preferably 4, because the job market's more competitive. So you need a bachelor's degree, unless you're doing something vocational and you're looking to get, you're doing something mason, carpenter, electrician, something of that sort, steel worker, contractor, something of that sort, where you're studying a trade or a craft and you're becoming a journeyman. It's different, right? It's different. That's the training process is more important there because it's on the job. But what I was going to say is, if you're getting a bachelor's degree, that's not always training you for the job, right? It's sort of like a 4-year educational prerequisite process that's giving you tools, knowledge, and skills and understanding, so that when an employer hires you, for the most part, they have a pretty good understanding that you could do work and learn something new that could be complicated or innovative. It's sort of a mental prerequisite check that you can learn and do things, skills. That's what it is. But you learn the job when you get on the job. That's how it is almost 90% of the time. All right, so this is what I mentioned, networking. I mentioned networking already. But this is the definition of networking. So for your exam, you want to remember the definitions. But what I'm saying, as far as, job prospects are concerned, networking is the most important way to do that. Okay, so diversity in management development. Women and minorities are gaining networking advantages. Reasons to develop female minority managers. It isn't about, so this is them talking here, right? It isn't about legality, morality, and morale, but rather bringing more talent into the fold. The best women and minorities will become harder to attract. So companies that commit to development have an edge. Having more women and minorities at all levels let businesses serve their women and minority customers better. So I think diversity is definitely at the forefront in the HR world. Uh, there's the last 50 years is way more women with degrees and education than ever before. Uh, there's obviously a lot of challenges that occur in the workplace, gender related challenges that occur in the workplace. In my last class, I mentioned about sexual harassment, things of that sort. Sometimes they're legitimate cases. Sometimes people claim cases because they can make money suing their employer. And that's why employers, the job has HR in place to protect itself, to protect to protect its own self, right? So in general, I will say that people just want to be graded on their own merit. That means you should hire me and choose me because I'm capable of doing my job, and I'm able to do that. But then the question, especially with affirmative action, comes into play where, well, you know, I'm a contractor, but I don't have the experience working with big companies because I'm not in the circle or in the loop doing the big deals, the big jobs, because it's an all boys club or it's a such and such club, and I can't get in the door. And that's where sort of affirmative action and diversity, championing diversity is coming to play to ensure we're following rules and laws according to diversity, but also making sure that having a more diverse environment encourages not just innovation, but also a lot of the rights and privileges that this country, America, has been founded on. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that a company is going to adhere to that. It doesn't mean the culture of the company follows that. It doesn't mean it's good for the company culture. The company culture is just the culture of the company. It's not nothing to do with right or wrong. It's just the way the company wants to organize itself and structure itself and manage itself, and it has to do so in a way that's legal. But whether or not it's legal, or people can have opinions about others, right? You could feel a sentiment against a certain ethnicity, creed, race, religion. You could feel a certain way. You could be wrong about it or right about it. It doesn't matter. You could feel a certain way, and you're entitled to your opinion and your own personal beliefs. But the laws are the laws, right? So you can't discriminate against someone because of that. But if you feel against a certain way against someone, you're going to naturally be biased and discriminate, whether you like it or not. So the reality is, you want to hire people on their merit, what they're capable of doing, their hard work, their moral capacity, things of that sort. But how do you test for that? Right? How do you test someone's moral capacity? Things of that sort. So companies just encourage diversity, but then they encourage sort of the rigidity of their structure of culture, where you have to fit the culture, right? And the culture is the personality, the characteristics, things of that sort. Are you a good culture fit? What does that mean, right? Culture fit means what? You could have two people from the same ethnic, religious culture, and they can interpret their culture two different ways and have two subcultures within their culture. And one is calling the other an extremist and the other isn't. So what does that mean? Culture, right? I can tell you this is the culture of this, and this is my culture, or this is the culture of the company. But there's obviously there's a lot of I want to say improvisation, but that's not what I really mean. What I mean is that it's up to interpretation at times, right? So a company's objectives really, their objective is their objective. Their culture, whatever that is, whatever that means, their HR practices, everything's just revolved around achieving the company goals. That's the main objective. That's it. Not breaking the law. And everything else is very subjective. And you have to kind of be okay with that. Some companies are just more fluid, more agile, less rigid, more open. And that might be your jam. and other companies not like that, and you fit right in. It is what it is. Uh, to just walk on eggshells and try to avoid certain things, but you look at their company and everyone looks the same way or dresses the same way. It's big time, right? You go to Silicon Valley, they all dress the same. So how is this open diversity, open this and open if everyone is a male that dresses the exact same way and literally will criticize you? I had this tech guy criticize me one time for my belt, the color of my belt, in relationship to the color of my shoes. And it's funny because he was right in terms of the matching component. But he's a tech guy. He looked like like the shirt, the pants, the shoes, the name brand of shoes is carbon copy tech guy. Championing diversity and liberalism or whatever you want to call it doesn't matter, right? It's the culture. So a lot of it's just BS. And you have to learn to navigate the BS and understand. So maybe if you're going to get a tech job, you go see where he shops and he put his shoes on, his pants on, his shirt, and you get the job. And then you work remotely from home in your underwear and no one knows, right? So, because a lot of tech guys, they work remotely now. So it is what it is, right? You're just dealing with people. You're dealing with their issues, their problems, their insecurities, their whatever. So what I will share with you this last story, which I shared with the last class, is I had a friend many years ago who worked for an HR firm. And they were like an HR consulting firm that sold packages to corporations. And those were HR packages. So corporations can structure their HR, create an HR package for their employees, and they pretty much did the whole thing for them. And he was telling me he was a sales agent. So he was to call and sell companies to sell these HR packages. And he loved his job. It, fit him well. And he was telling me about the HR packages. And he's telling me how these HR packages, they're not for you, the employee, they're for the employer. So they had an HR package, there's a hire and fire, churn and burn package where the HR package was designed to take employees and kind of bring them in and then manage them out and kind of either get them to quit or fire them before the 3 years so they couldn't invest into a pension, invest their benefits. And the people they wanted, they take and keep and promote, but the rest, and there's just a revolving door of churning and burning. And he was saying that was one of their most successful packages because it was so cost effective. Keeping, recruiting, training new employees and growing them in the company was not cost effective. Well, training and recruiting new employees and then getting rid of them before they locked in their long-term benefits because it was super expensive, that was more cost effective. So, HR is not about you. It's about the employee and the employer protecting the company, achieving its goals, managing the employees, the human resources for their benefit. So what I will say is if you work for a company and they have a union, your union is there to protect you against any issues with the company. I gave this story in my last class. I'll just quickly say it. My sister-in-law, I won't give details. She was working for a company. She was due for a promotion tenureship that's contractually guaranteed. She met all the obligations and her boss didn't want to give it to her. Smart girl, hardworking employee, no reason why she wouldn't get it, but didn't want to give it to her because the moment she gets tenured, she gets all her bonuses and all her compensation locked in permanently for the rest of her life. Can't get fired, more or less. And it's like millions of dollars of compensation over her lifetime that they'd be guaranteed to pay. So managing her out and then rehiring some newbie is better than locking in an experienced professional. So, she got pissed off and left, and they achieved their goal of getting rid of her from an HR standpoint. But she didn't know if she just went to her union and told her union what the issue was. The union would have fought, and she would have got her tenureship because she met the requirements. So I'm just giving you guys a heads up. If you work for a firm and they have a union, your union is that's for you, right? HR is for the employer. The union is for the employee. So never forget your union is there to protect you, right? You have an issue with your employer, you have issues with anything, unemployment, whatever, go to your union. They have lawyers, they have legal people to help you. They're there to protect you with that. So just remember that. Okay, it might save you in the future. So this is the end of the lecture. I'm gonna call class. If you guys have any questions, shoot me an email. So take care, everybody.